consider rhetoric and preaching. Rhetoric and preaching. Now I want to make some preliminary comments with regard to this course unit that I think are very, very useful in terms of helping us to think through the issues that we will think through. I will say, if there is an issue, not just an issue, but I think two issues with which we grapple after completing our theological training, wherever it is, at the certificate, diploma, degree, postgraduate, master's, PhD, whatever level it is. Even though we might have lots of theological knowledge under our belts and we can think through complex, difficult theological issues, yet there are these two issues that I think we often struggle with. The first one is the issue called logic. Logic. We struggle with logic, and that is just a way to say we struggle with critical or analytical thinking. That's what I mean by logic. Critical or analytical thinking. We struggle there. Now, I've often said in your hearing that we cannot speak clearly if we cannot think clearly. Oftentimes, you see a preacher struggle on the pulpit. He has an idea in his head. He knows what he wants to say, but because it is fuzzy and unclear in his own mind, he cannot communicate it to the people hearing him. So you hear him do things like, how can I say this? I know what I want to say, but I just don't know what to say, you see. It's a failure of logic. But the failure of logic sometimes manifests itself in another way. And the way that I'm referring to is a man who has a lot of information, knowledge, data, but can't quite correlate that data as it affects itself within itself. So you remember we say beyond the matter of knowledge, we must also strive for the matter of understanding. Now, understanding is a function of logic. I have this set of data. I have these doctrines, for example. The doctrine of the hypostatic union of Christ. All right? The doctrine of the impeccability of Christ. These are doctrines. The doctrine of the atonement, for example. The doctrine of the incarnation, Christ becoming flesh. So these are doctrines I might understand individually as standalone subjects, considered in and of themselves, separate from one another. But understanding comes when I know how the doctrine of the incarnation then affects the doctrine of the atonement, and how the atonement is dependent on the doctrine of the impeccability of Christ, and how impeccability of Christ is informed by the hypostatic union. Now when I get to that place where I'm able to correlate issues I am at a place of understanding. And what brought me to the place of understanding is this thing we're calling logic. Dr. R.C. Sproul, I think, quoting Aurelius Augustine, declares to us that logic is the organon of all sciences. That is to say, in any scientific enterprise, that is to say, in any effort to acquire knowledge, all right? What organizes the disparate, segmented, fragmented pieces of information and collates them, arranges them? Remember that I say we think in terms of categories, right? What arranges them in category is that thing we call logic. The organon of all sciences. Now I say to you, our first failure as ministers, as expositors, as exegetes, as proclaimers of the sacred message comes from the failure of logic. Now, in all of my life, in my teaching career here at WTC, I have often said to my students, time without number, that if I fail to teach you anything else, may I be able to teach you how to think. And I'm afraid I have not had a lot of success in that one. So you see somebody who struggles, rather has a good understanding of this doctrine, but once you ask him to apply that doctrine here, he begins to struggle. Because you see, he understands that doctrine alone, not how it relates to the other. But logic helps us to get there. So again I say, if you will preach clearly, you've got to be able to think clearly. That's so precious, my brothers. That's so precious. That is why I've said time and again that those who benefit from WTC mostly, and you will see this in the way they go out to serve the Lord, are those who engage in class discussions. They ask questions. When I ask a question, they volunteer to answer, and in that interaction, they're growing their logic, you see. But the person who's quiet all through is not interacting. All you're doing is you are taking knowledge, but never learning how to relate those pieces of information. Are you following what I'm saying to you? Now this is demonstrable. You can see it in the people that leave the WTC. Those that seem to do well are those that were active in class. You challenge the teacher. And when the teacher throws out a challenge, you are very quick to take up that challenge. And in the process, you grow yourself. Now, people ask me, how is it you're able to argue the way you're able to argue? And I've always said, maybe I've told you yourselves, that if there is a human being, one individual, there's about three, but one, I think, stands out of the rest, who has helped my journey in developing my thinking, developing my logical abilities. It will be my own brother, my elder brother, Barnabas, who is coming to preach. Now, he didn't sit me in a class and teach me logic. Whenever we meet with Barnabas, anywhere, anytime, we're always arguing about something. Theology. Posse peccare, non posse peccare. What do you think of close communion, open communion? Which is the more biblical one? And even if I agree with him, sometimes I will take an opposite direction and argue differently. And in the argument, he sharpens me. In the argument, I sharpen him. In some arguments, he brings up something I didn't know. In the argument, I bring up something he didn't know. In the argument, he brings up a way of thinking about this thing which I did not think about before. So I leave the argument richer than when I went into the argument. Developing logic. Now, funny enough, his son, called Joshua, is becoming that to me. He's a very intelligent young man. Very bright. He always has something we're arguing about. We can talk on phone for 2 hours, arguing over something. He takes a position and I challenge it. Of course, I win most of the time. But if you listen to Joshua now, he will be more theologically sound, more theologically grown than many people that are going to the degree level. I'm telling you that for free. Because he sharpens himself. And iron sharpens, so does man brighten the countenance of another. Deep calleth unto the deep. So I say to us, we must strive to develop our thinking, to develop our critical, to develop our analytical abilities. That's key. Now, here's something else I'm saying to you. And I've said it again and again and again. I have left college with many people when I was studying theology. Many. My classmates there. And I hope this doesn't come off as bragging or as boasting, but few of them can do the things I do. Few of them can go to the stages I go to. Same to you here. You're in the same class, listen to the same teacher, expose the same material, but one of you, two of you will go out and be more productive, be more useful, be able to be invited and to be fruitful where you're invited. Now what's the difference? The one was in class taking. The other after class was developing himself further. Read more books. Engage in more arguments. Think more. You know? Don't just preach in class. You know, I have lecture notes for this course. They are somewhere, tucked in a black book. Before you came in, I have been engaged in drawing up a different lecture series. And I looked at this and what I did before, and they are quite different. Well, not in substance, but they're more developed, this one, I think. Because I'm always challenging myself to grow, you see. Otherwise, I'll be the same teacher to you that I will be 10 years now, from now. So what, I become a regurgitator of information? No, I can't be. I'm reading books, I'm listening to people, I'm engaging in conversations, I'm sharpening my mind. There's something I said last year in this way, I will not say it this year in that way, I will say it differently. Some things happened in the last 5 years that have changed the world, and have changed the way we think and the way we approach issues. Now if I come with the same old tools, I'm not helping my students, you see. It's like doctors. A doctor who left college with his medical degree, and he's seated in his office just looking at the same notes, treating the same things, we'll have a problem. Now we have novel coronavirus, for example, as a new virus that came up. What do we do with that? You didn't study that in school. What do you do with it? The principles are the same, but how we apply them are different. So, again I say, number one, we struggle with logic. Please, whatever you do to develop that, you've got to develop it. Logic, thinking. Okay? That's our first struggle. Now, the second place of our struggle is in the area of communication. That is the second area of our struggle, communication. Communication. Just how do I pass on to another person, to other people, that which I know? That's communication, isn't it? How do I relay? How do I take that which is in my head and bring it to other people's heads in such a manner that it will be useful to them, that they can relate to, that they can take up and run with, that they can in fact say, this is something useful for me, and I can in fact digest it, and I can indeed deploy it in use. This failure will be seen by a preacher who is permanently preaching, but there is no change happening to the people he's preaching to. Now, you could say the devil is preventing them from changing. You could say that. suggest to you the failure might be in your communication. How you're passing your information across. Having said those two things that I've said, in the olden days, these things were taught in a discipline that was called rhetoric. Rhetoric. And it happened. You do remember in your historical theology and church history that Aurelius Augustine of Hippo, before he became a Christian, he was a Manichaean. That's a very terrible religion of old. A Manichaean. But what was the profession of Aurelius Augustine? He was a rhetorician. A rhetorician. A rhetorician is a man who is paid, who earns his living by talking, by communicating, by speaking. Back in the day, people valued speaking. And so people who could speak clearly and speak effectively were in very high demand. They were in very high demand. People loved them, people appreciated them, people wanted them, whatever they were. They were sought after. You find a little bit of this in Acts of the Apostles, chapter 17, 18, and 19. What was that thing they called Areopagus? Except it was a pulpit where people gathered to speak and others would hear. Because the Athenians were strange people because they wanted to hear a new thing every day. Nevertheless, rhetoric was celebrated back in that day. And Paul frequented the Areopagus, didn't he? He availed himself there. And he gave his disputations. Not only that, we are told that the apostles time and again would go into the synagogues and there they would engage the Jews in a back and forth, back and forth. Look at Paul, the apostle, before King Agrippa. His testimony from chapter 21 of Acts all the way to chapter 26 during these councils and these courtroom debates. He so argues cogently in rhetoric that King Agrippa is almost persuaded. And he says, Paul, do you want to make me a Christian? Because the arguments you're bringing are very powerful. Please, brothers, don't assume people must listen to you simply because you are their pastor. That is arrogant. That is arrogant. Don't assume people must listen to you because you occupy the stage. That is arrogant. When I come to listen to you, I come because I am selfish. As a hearer, as an audience, I am selfish. I am looking for a benefit. That's the only reason I'm listening to you. So you got to sharpen your speaking abilities, your abilities of logic, your abilities of communication. That makes up for effective rhetoric. You got to sharpen that because as I come again to listen to you, I am only listening to you because I want to benefit. I want to be taught. I want to get something out of your talking. I must go home with something. So please don't assume I'm your pastor or I've been given an opportunity to speak, so you must listen to me. And when they begin to sleep, for example, you begin to get angry. Yet you say nothing. You know? So those two problems we must deal with. And that is why we developed this course unit called Rhetoric Preaching. In the college which I attended, which Jeff also attended, they simply call this preaching. Which is okay. But I think there's more to preaching than just preaching. There is the whole process of developing logical, critical, analytical thinking, as we will say later on tomorrow and the day after, making sure you develop a solid message so that you have what we call content. There is meat and soup in what you're going to say. Because I think there's a danger, and I'll tell you this I think in the second lecture today. But you could be the preacher who is all fire and no content. That's bad. But you could also be a preacher who is all content but no fire. That's also bad. Again, remember the pendulum we spoke about yesterday? It cannot swing to the left and the right. It must settle somewhere in the middle. I've got to have fire in my belly, but it's got also to be content in what I say. As I will show you in the second lecture, in a proper gospel preaching, there are two things that are inseparable. One, a proclamation, content, what I'm saying, what I've read, what I need you to know. But number two, appeal, a call to action. I'm affecting your emotion. I'm persuading you. I want you to act in accordance to that which I am speaking to you. So it is not dry content, it is content with a view to implementation. I'm calling for action. Two aspects of preaching you must never forget. Proclamation, appeal. Proclamation, appeal. Proclamation, appeal. Vital things, vital things, vital things. So we struggle with that, don't we? Now, having said the things that I have said, let me then go ahead and define in your hearing what we mean by preaching. What do we mean by preaching? What do we mean by preaching? Now, I have a very simple definition that I want us to use in this class now. Write it down if you want to do so. Preaching is a proclamation. Preaching is a proclamation. Preaching is a proclamation in behalf of another. That's important. Preaching is a proclamation in behalf of another, mostly a superior authority, mostly a superior authority. Preaching is a proclamation in behalf of another, mostly a superior authority, comma, with an expectation of divine intervention, with an expectation of divine intervention to affect a desired change. Preaching is a proclamation in behalf of another, mostly a superior authority, with an expectation of a divine intervention to affect a desired change. What you're trying to do with that definition is simply to say that preaching isn't merely speaking. Preaching is not merely speaking. That has become a very common way of referring to the activity of preaching. I think, and I agree with a friend of mine, say Michael Maura, who I think made a Facebook post a few days ago, and he said, back in the day, they used to say, let us welcome our preacher. This day they say, let us welcome our speaker. Back in the day, the posters read, this is the guest preacher. Today the posters read, this is the guest speaker. Now, there's technically nothing wrong with that, really. But no, preaching is more than speaking. Preaching has depth to it that ordinary speaking doesn't have. Preaching has an accountability built into it which ordinary speaking doesn't have. Speaking is sort of, you can represent yourself in speaking. But in preaching, you are hardly representing yourself. You are representing another. So then preaching becomes something of a different discipline altogether. So notice we say it is a proclamation. It's a proclamation. It's not a whisper, it's a proclamation. It is an announcement. It is a declaration. The Greek word used in the Bible to refer to the activity of preaching is the Greek word keruso. You probably know this. The Greek word referred to in the Bible as it relates to the activity of preaching is the word keruso. And properly, the Old English word that translates that Greek word is the word herald. Herald. Who is a herald? A herald is a king's announcer. A man who speaks for a higher authority. You know, back in the day there were no telegrams, right? Back in the day there were no text messaging. Back in the day there were no WhatsApp. Back in the day there were no emails. There were no fax machines. Back in the day there was no telephone. There were no loudspeakers. There were no radios. So what would happen is when a king or an authority wanted to communicate a message about himself, his kingdom, his programs to his subjects, what he would do is he will call for the announcer. He was specifically employed for that task. Usually they found a man who had a great voice. That means he could stand in the marketplace and stretch his voice and everybody could hear him. But that man also must be a man with a good memory. Thinking logic, right? Good memory in the sense that he won't forget the message that the king has given him. But this man was also a man that had to be able to communicate in a way that the people will understand and appreciate. That's the herald. That's the keruso. Actually, the kerus. It's not keruso really, it's kerus or kerix. Keruso is the message. So the kerus must be a man with a voice large enough, a style good enough, and a winsomeness about him that makes his message more readily received. That's a kerus, a herald, a proclaimer, an announcer, a declaration maker, the preacher. So you must never forget that aspect of preaching, the proclamation. Now, in his book, Preaching and Preachers, Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones makes a case that I think is worth thinking about. You may not agree with him fully, but I think I agree with him. He asks and answers the question, are preachers made or are they born? And I think the answer Dr. Lloyd-Jones gives is that it's both. You cannot make a preacher a man who was not born a preacher. But you can sharpen a man who was born a preacher and make him a great preacher. That is to say, if a man can hardly speak, project his voice. My friends, what use do we have of this man? If in a gathering such as the one we have now, in this class, he cannot speak up, we cannot hear him, how is he a preacher? And so for those of you, dear friends, who believe God has called you to preaching, yet you cannot project your voice, you must begin to develop that. You must. There's no other way. There is no other way. Oh, I will speak this way, but the Spirit of God will use my words. No, no, no. We have got to hear. How shall they believe on him whom they have not heard? So there's got to be a hearing. We've got to hear you. So he argues, Dr. Lloyd Jones, that preachers are born and then made. That there's going to be things within you that qualify you for the ministry and the activity of preaching. So there is that proclamation as part of our definition, an announcement. But not just have a proclamation within our definition. We have something else within that definition. That proclamation is not in your own behalf, it's in behalf of another. And we say, usually, a superior authority. I think in some lectures I had, and it's in my book as well, Wielding the Sword of the Spirit, you will find that I'm speaking about those qualifications, personal qualifications for gospel ministry. They will be there in that book, and I'll run through some of them in my lecture here. But friends, we are speaking for God. The preacher is not representing himself. The preacher is not trying to make himself look good. The preacher is selling God to the people. He is a marketer of God. He is a representative of God. Go back to that example I gave you of the cherubs in the ancient days. When he came, the cherubs, to announce the king's message, he made every effort to draw attention to the message and never to himself. A proper representative will leave people remembering the message more than they remember him. That's important. The ministry, if at all it is a ministry, of Dr. David O'War, Edward, we know it's a false ministry because we know more about him than we know about the master he might be representing. He calls attention to himself, both in his dressing but also in his words. He calls attention to himself. Have you seen the way when he comes into town? Sometime back in Eldoret, they were washing the tarmac roads with soap and water so that the vehicles, the motorcade, the convoy, the entourage of the man of God will pass through. Attention to himself. That's not a preacher. That is not a preacher. Then we had a man, I think that was in Uganda or someplace. When he came, say, to this church, people begin to line up from Garden Park, and they will sleep on their bellies, and he will walk on them. It draws attention to himself rather than to God. What does John do when he sees the superior he has come to represent? Remember, he's a voice of one calling in the wilderness. Prepare the way for me? No. Prepare the way for one who is coming after me. Now, when they ask him, are you the one? He is vehement. He says, I'm not the one. I'm not the one. I'm only a voice. I'm only a messenger. Oh, and then there comes a time when people try to make him jealous of the growth and the prominence and the fame of the Lord Jesus Christ. They said to him, John, your disciples are leaving you and they're following Jesus. And John, he says, no, that's the way it should be. For he must increase and I must decrease. We cannot call attention to ourselves as preachers. It's a proclamation, but a proclamation in behalf of another. Usually a higher, superior authority. You do see Paul and Barnabas preaching, actually Paul and Silas. What was it? I'm not sure. And the miracles have happened in the ministries by the hand of God. And the people say, surely the gods have visited us in human flesh. Let us offer sacrifices to this man and be glad that the gods have visited us. Does he accept? They tear their clothes, rend them, say, people, you cannot do this to us. We are mere men. By the way, the activity of tearing their clothes was to expose their nakedness, to say, we are humans like you, we are people of shame. In other words, don't put attention to us, but God. The same is in chapter 3 of Acts. That man at the gate called Beautiful, who's been healed, was crippled. And the people say, Peter and company, John, you've done such a wonderful thing. God has gifted you. You are great men of God. You are useful. You're wonderful, as somebody said to me today. So I can't remember. And then what these two people say, they say, you see what has happened here? You remember the man you crucified? Remember him? Jesus? It is in his name. It is because of him. What is happening here has happened. And therefore, again, they shift attention from themselves and they put it on God. I will tell you, I think in the third, fourth, fifth lecture, whatever, that part of the marks of a true gospel ministry is it is theocentric as opposed to anthropocentric. Forget that. We'll talk about this in the coming lectures. It talks more about God than it talks about man. It elevates God and always puts man down, including himself. So preaching is a proclamation, it's an announcement, it's a message. But it's an announcement in behalf of another. Usually a higher, a superior authority. But there are not just two things within our definition. There's something else that I want you to see in that definition. That in preaching, as opposed to a talk, in preaching, as opposed to a talk or a speech or a lecture, there is an expectation of divine intervention. That's important, my friends. That's absolutely important. Because we are representing God, we have a legitimate expectation that the God we are representing will intervene in power to cause something, which I will tell you is the characteristic number 4 of preaching. Number 1 is a proclamation. Number 2 is in behalf of another. Number 3, it is an expectation of a divine intervention. We're expecting God to step in. C.S. Spurgeon, in his book called The Soul Winner, he makes this interesting statement. I think he also makes it in his lectures to his students. Spurgeon says, as we go out to preach, we must hold out an expectation, he says. We must hold out an expectation that people will be saved. You know, this is the danger of, I say danger, yes, I think possible danger of thinking in a reformed way. Because the reformed people have such a wonderful understanding of God's sovereignty, right? So they say, if God wants them to be saved, they will be saved. You know, God wants them to be saved. So, me, I'm just going to preach. And then you preach in a lasciva manner. You preach in a very weak manner. You preach with no feeling, no passion. Because somehow you think, anyway, if God wants them to be saved, they'll be saved. I may go and preach and maybe God won't save anybody. You know, you go out, you're already defeated, you see. But when I mount a stage, my friends, there, and I'm preaching, I am talking to those people with an expectation that the God I'm representing will bring change to these people. So preaching is not just a talk, it's not just a speech. We are hoping, we are looking at, we are expecting that there will be an intervention. There will be. God will step in. You know, reminds me of that encounter on Mount Carmel. You remember that in 1 Kings 18? Elijah, the prophets of Baal. And Elijah, as he engages the prophets of Baal, there's some confidence within him, isn't there? There's some confidence within him. There's an expectation within him that I am representing the God of heaven, and he is able to consume the sacrifice. So see what Elijah does. He gives the prophets of Baal all the time. Do what you must. Do what you have to. Oh, and then they do their thing. Oh, hear us, Baal. Come to our rescue. Yeah. And that goes on for the whole day. When Elijah comes, everything he does tells you he's confident. Tells you he's expecting that God will come. First says, prepare the altar. And he's prepared. Dig the trenches around it. Because I want to pour water on that sacrifice. I want to make it hard. I want to make it so clear that when fire comes and consumes, that this would not be a man's work. This would only be God. Let's make it impossible. Pour more water, they pour. Pour more, they pour. Satisfied? Can anything happen here? No. Good. But someone who is confident that God will step in. And then hear his prayer. He says, I thank you, Lord God of heaven. Let it be known today. Woo. Let it be known today. That's a declarative statement. That's a statement of a man who is expecting something spectacular to happen. Let it be known today that you are God and that I'm your servant, and that I've done all these things according to your command. You have sent me. Let it be known. You have sent me. And as we pray, what happened? Fire came and licked the sacrifice. That's how we have to proceed. Confidence in God. Confidence that the God we represent will intervene to change things. So here is Moses in the wilderness. He meets with God. And God sends him with a message, with a keruso, with a proclamation, you know. So he's making Moses a herald, an announcer. All right, so God, what do we do here? God says, go to Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go. That's the message I've given you. Go tell Pharaoh, let my people go, that they may worship me in the wilderness. So Moses says, fine, I can go, but if they ask me who I sent you, what do I say? I say I am who I am sent you. All right, that's good. But how are they to believe? I want to know you will show up. And so God has to convince him, isn't it? Okay, Moses, what do you have in your hands? He says, look, Lord, I have a staff. I'm a shepherd. That's what I used to shepherd the flock of Jethro. And this is what I've got. He said, put it down. Turns into a snake. Pick it up. Turns into a stick. Moses, I'm with you. That's the message. I will confirm you as a messenger. I will confirm what you say as my message. So the message and the messenger will both be confirmed by God's intervention. And so there Moses goes before Pharaoh with an expectation that I am announcing this thing to Pharaoh and God will show. You know, there it was, the New Testament then now. Paul, the apostle. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, it says to Corinthians, when I came to you, well, I came to preach the entire. When I came to preach, I did not come with enticing words of man's wisdom, but by what? The demonstration, proof of the Spirit and power. For what reason? That your faith may not be built on human wisdom, but on the power of God. So Paul always perspective that when there is preaching, there is power, isn't it? That's Romans 1:16. I am not ashamed of the gospel. Why am I not ashamed of the gospel? Because the gospel is the dunamis, God's power that brings salvation. Or 1 Corinthians 1:18. I'm not ashamed of the message of the cross, for it is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us for being saved. What is it? So preaching is a proclamation in behalf of another with an expectation of divine intervention. Here's number 4 from our definition. That divine intervention is not for the purpose of entertainment, my friends. But number 4 we say, preaching aims to affect a desired change. Preaching aims to affect a desired change. Preaching aims to affect a desired change. That's a characteristic number 4 of preaching from our definition. It aims to affect a desired change. Not entertainment, but there's going to be change. Demonstrable, discernible, quantifiable, observable change. See, the problem is today preaching has been made something of an entertainment. You know. Oh, who's a good preacher? The one who makes us laugh most. Who's a good preacher? Oh, the one who really speaks and we're excited. No, oh, no, oh, yeah, no. We're taking change. If any man be in Christ is a new creature. Preaching aims for that, you see. Preaching aims for it. Preaching doesn't aim to gather people in church, many of them, so that there's number. See, these days, we, brothers, and you live here, you must think carefully about this. Even the church planters like my brother Jeff there. Yeah. All of us. See, I received these reports. Oh, we have 10 people now. Oh, now we have 20 people. Another came to me and said, oh, we just about to baptize 8 people. So what? You can baptize 50. No problem. Jesus says, you make them twice candidates of hell. Because now you've confirmed them in unbelief. A lady came to me, saying, Pastor, it's been long, you've been talking to me. Why can't I be baptized? I say, that's part of the problem. When you're ready to baptize, we will see you are ready to baptize. My son came to me and said, Lord, so tell me, what can prevent me now from being baptized? I said, I have 2 answers for you. One, I'll answer you as a pastor. 2, I'll answer you as a father. As a pastor, I'm telling you, nothing can hinder you from being baptized. Because your professed faith, as far as I can see, you're okay. You're ticking all the boxes. You have a hunger for God, for study, for prayer, I see all that. But as a father, I want to be careful so that I don't confirm you in something we are not sure about. So as a father, what's my answer? Many things can prevent you. We need to see that there's been change. See what I'm saying? For preaching doesn't just aim to gather people. Preaching aims to affect real, discernible, concrete, identifiable, quantifiable, measurable change. And we cannot be satisfied with half results. It's easy to settle with half results. Very easy. Because we are very quick to make them members and to allow them to come in. We are very quick with it. And that's dangerous. Because once you do that, you confirm these people in their unbelief and in their half-baked status. So we refuse to do it. Desired change. Desired change. So, preaching then, in conclusion of this first lecture, preaching must be distinguished from talk or talks. Preaching must be distinguished from lectures if you are lecturing on Bible issues, that there will be an element of preaching in there. And I think you've seen it even in the lecture I've delivered. I am pleading with you, brothers, let us not settle, isn't it? And I'm going through scripture, am I not? Quoting Paul, going through church history. Because it can't just be a lecture, you see, where I sit and tell you, this course has this outline. We have 4 things we're going to consider today. Write them on the board, show you a few readings, and then let you go. No, I'm actually going to preach the lecture to you. So preaching must be distinguished from talks, from lectures, and from speeches. Preaching must be distinguished from talks, lectures, and speeches. What you're training in this school here, Wisdom Training Center, School of Ministry and Theology, at this special diploma level, is not so that you can be able to give talks. You're training to be preachers, aren't you? And if you're training to be preachers, my friend, that which you're training for has those 4 integral elements, those 4 inseparable attributes. 1, you must understand it is a proclamation. You've got to give it your all. You've got to bring all your resources to bear. Number 2, it is in behalf of another. In this case, God, superior, authority. Number 3, we are always expecting a divine intervention. And number 4, we are always looking to affect a change. And in those things, preaching is distinguished from those other forms of communication which I've listed in your hearing.